So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Political No Brainer, the podcast where we get past winner takes all politics and into real conversation. We're bringing in all voices from all sides to speak about real issues. And Beth is going to be joining us. Charlie is not going to be joining us. Kevin is here now. Charlie's busy. We're going to miss him a lot. He's got a lot of great stuff. Um, Me and Kevin just jumped in on a conversation about stand your ground, the law in Florida that expanded, like Kevin used the word, expanded the castle doctrine. So the castle doctrine in Florida was the rule of law that made all sorts of perfect sense. Somebody walks into your home and you shoot him dead. He's an intruder. You're not going to be charged with murder. You're basically the castle doctrine was an open document that said you can shoot this person the minute he sets foot in your house. Then there was the old debate, what if he's out and about in your front yard and he's wielding a gun and he's threatening to come in? Do you have to shoot him in your front yard and then drag him in your house? No. There was always that rule of reason that even though it wasn't spelled out, that you didn't have to drag a dead man into your front house and then argue with the coroner's office that there's a blood streak creeping across your walkway that you didn't. So no, there was always that logic. There was never a concern. Was that logic there? It was always there. We never heard of a case, especially in Florida, where somebody was charged with something. In a situation like that, was charged with a crime in a situation like that. But then came the the stand your ground law, which expanded the law of the castle doctrine. It's that simple. It was an addendum to the castle doctrine that expanded the rule of law to be like, you feel threatened and you just feel threatened. And suddenly you wield a gun and you shoot the guy because you feel threatened. Or in the case of Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman, maybe was his name?
Yes, that's exactly right. It was
George
George Zimmerman.
Zimmerman, where the police literally said, okay, so you see this, and I'm just going to say it like it is. You see this black man running through backyards, and the police expressed no concern whatsoever. They told George Zimmerman, stand down, we're on our way. We are trained professionals. We are equipped with numerous different varieties of options, including taser guns, including the fact that there's power in numbers. We're going to show up 4 or 5 officers at once and get to the bottom of why this person is back here. But George Zimmerman chose not to wait. He chose to take action into his own hands. And Trayvon Martin could fight, and he was being attacked. It's that simple. It was a common practice to race through the backyards. I know somebody that lives out there. People race through the backyards to get where they're going. It's not necessarily legal, but it's not grounds for whipping out a gun and shooting a guy either. But George Zimmerman was cleared. He was cleared for many reasons. So one of the reasons was in Florida and everywhere, lawyers are pedigrees. He got the best possible lawyer known to mankind, Mark O'Mara. And Mark defended him and played the jury perfectly, and George Zimmerman walked away with doing something he didn't have to do. It's that simple. So jump in, Kevin.
Well, at the heart of the castle doctrine, at the heart of stand your ground, is a principle of affirmative defense for murder. So, an affirmative defense is one where a person engages in something that that breaks the law. And the question is, did they have a justifiable reason for doing it? It becomes an affirmative defense. So in the event that you are being attacked and you don't have an opportunity to get away and you're defending yourself, if in defending yourself, you kill the person, this is called self-defense, you know. And so the castle doctrine, taking that same principle, created a space where in this context you are allowed, it's clear, it's a legislative manner by which you're saying yes, in your own house, if an intruder comes in your own house and you wind up using lethal force, right, it's an affirmative defense for a charge of murder or manslaughter. And then we extend it as you described in stand your ground. But here's where it perverts the original intent of self-defense. The idea is the burden is on in the self-defense principle is that you had no other choice.
You
In
couldn't
other words,
retreat.
you couldn't retreat. So it's really played out very well in the George Zimmerman Trayvon Martin case. And that's because the where George Zimmerman found he had to stand his ground was after he intended to pursue Trayvon Martin. This wasn't Trayvon Martin chasing George Zimmerman, and George Zimmerman had no other choice but to defend himself. And in the process of defending himself, he killed, Trayvon Martin. This is George Zimmerman as the aggressor, right? And he was told to stand down. So all this
Well,
while he
let's
always
preface that point. And I'm not interrupting. I'm just saying when we say he was told to stand down, we need to preface that point to the nth degree. He was told to stand down by the police, and he was told we're on our way. And I don't mean to repeat myself, but when you think of the police being on their way, they have every utility necessary to handle the situation with. And if necessary, if this person, if this perpetrator, who is not really a perpetrator, starts wielding weapons or becomes an aggressor, then they also have the option of lethal force. But he was told, don't do anything. This is not a matter of did he have the opportunity to retreat. This is a matter of he had no reason to pursue.
Well, okay, all that's true. But I just want to clarify and keep it just as simple as possible for our listeners is the idea that this is about justification for murdering someone as a society, as a civilized country, right? Under what circumstances is it okay for you to murder someone? And typically one of those reasons are you had no other choice, you were defending yourself, you were under attack. Okay, by the time George Zimmerman found himself in that situation, it was true. But let us understand the reason why he got there was because he chased Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin was the one who was defending himself. And
So leave it
in the
right there.
pro-
Let's get Beth in on this. Beth, you're there? She's coming on. Okay, go ahead.
I'm here,
Oh,
but
you're here.
Hey, Beth.
So
I
Beth,
don't
let
know
me
what you
get you.
guys are talking about. But
No, that's what I'm going to do. I'm
what
going
do
to get you
you?
clued in right now. So we're reflecting on the text we got from Charlie about how now, essentially, it's okay. A police officer pulls you over. You could have a gun in your lap, and that's just fine. That's just willy-nilly practice at this point. Okay, so then we got into the Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman case, where George Zimmer was instructed by the police to not act. That was the instruction. We're coming. We're coming. And the idea that I presented was that not only did he not need to act, acting was the issue. And the fact that the police have all the utilities in the world to handle the situation either by lethal force or non-lethal force, him acting was the issue. So that's the conversation. And then we were talking about essentially how the old law, the essential law from the beginning was the castle doctrine, where if somebody walks in your home wielding a gun or threatening your family, you have the right to kill them. Simple. Then they added this addendum, stand your ground, where if you feel threatened out and about in the open, you could kill that person. So that's where we were kicking off this conversation. And then Kevin was and we both me and I, Kevin, when we were teaming, we were like, we need to hear more from Beth. So if you want to jump right in, go right
Are you
ahead and tell us.
you're talking about the new castle doctrine in Florida?
Yeah. Not the
You,
newest one. I think the newest one you may be referring to what Charlie texted us. I'm talking about the George Zimmerman and the Trayvon Martin case, where the Castle Doctrine, this I guess the second addendum, the first addendum to the stand your ground to this first addendum to the Castle Doctrine was to stand your ground. Now we're on to new stuff, but we're talking about the George, right, Kevin?
Right. And Beth, is there a stand your ground law in Virginia? Because I know that's where you live.
there is there's a standard ground law, but they've just recently it's always been open carry. As long as you carried, as long as it was visible, you didn't have to have a concealed weapons. So there is a standard ground, but you have a duty to retreat.
There you
Thank
go.
you. That was what me and
So,
Kevin were bringing out. Was there
yeah,
isn't essentially, at least according to the Trayvon Martin George Zimmerman case, there was no duty to retreat. There was really no duty to pursue. There was no need for him to pursue either.
no,
No, I
no, that's right.
agree.
You
Yeah,
go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Beth. I'm sorry.
No, with the Zimmerman case, no, he absolutely he was told, we got it. Don't follow him. And I just think it was, when you have a gun, you're the big bad one on the street. So like, why would he not? You wouldn't be afraid to get into a scuffle with this kid. But it wasn't until they got into a scuffle and he was losing that he had to pull out the gun. He should have never. He should have just let it go and let the cops. But I feel like in Florida there is this disappointment with the police that when it comes to property crimes and stuff, they just don't do enough. People feel like they have to do, their own justice, or else, justice isn't done. And it just turned out that it was so horrific. It came back on him. However, he got off, and then I think several years later was arrested for the same thing, some a murder on another charge.
And
Am I
did he get
right?
off? I hadn't seen that case. Did he get off, or do we know what's
The
going on with
second
that?
one, I don't think he got off. The first one he got off, but the second one, no. He went to prison for murder.
Well,
That is
This is
really
my
interesting.
understanding. I think.
We could check into that, but that's very interesting. But the thing at the heart of that really illuminated in the Trayvon Martin case, George Zimmerman, and is a part of the ongoing saga in these stand your ground cases, is that what it does to the principle of self-defense. Under what circumstance in America do we want to authorize people to justify people killing someone else? Beth honed in on one of the core principles of why historically we have self-defense as an affirmative defense for murder is because it requires you, there's a duty to retreat. If you have an alternative to actually harming the person, you need to take it. The problem is that when you allow people to exercise their discretion, now you apply the Second Amendment, you say you could open carry a weapon. Okay. The idea that that doesn't empower people to make different choices that they would not have otherwise made, like in the case of George Zimmerman. Does George Zimmerman chase Trayvon Martin if he didn't have a weapon? Right? Indeed. Okay. And so a person is allowed to be the aggressor, and then if they get under pressure, as George Zimmerman did, he started to lose the scuffle, right? Right. And literally, it was established. Well, it was certainly alleged because we didn't get Trayvon Martin's point of view, but in the scuffle, it was alleged that Trayvon Martin went after George Zimmerman's gun, right? But of course, if you're in a scuffle with someone who has a gun, you're probably going to go after their gun because if they go after the gun, what happened to Trayvon Martin is what you fear. So that's my point. What it does is it defeats the duty to retreat. And it creates it, and this is where the vigilantism comes in that now it's my responsibility if I think that someone else is doing something they shouldn't be doing, I'm allowed to go ahead and exact justice. And the problem is, what if you were wrong? One of the most frustrating things, Coach Trippy, I feel about the Trayvon Martin case is the idea is the allegation that he was engaged in illegal activity. Is it just that was never there was never a context of establishing that he was walking through people's backyards, that he was trespassing in people's property. It's that was a part of the allegation
right.
on the
And you know
side
what's
of
funny about that allegation? I don't mean to interrupt, but you know what's funny about it is often when a law is ignored long enough and not pursued long enough, it no longer is an enforceable law at some point in time.
course.
So there
That's right.
was so there was this sense of, and I'm telling you, I know somebody that lives in that community that wasn't even able to get home unless you produced a driver's license that showed you lived in that area during that investigation. That's how close that person was to that community. And and so you have this practice of the kids rummaging through people's backyards just to get home quicker. Then you have the issue of this vigilante who like we said, he's just this big white guy, and wielding a gun. You suddenly notice he's wielding a gun. He's not wearing a law enforcement uniform. He is not a law enforcement officer. He was directed by law enforcement not to take action. So this young man who's just doing what every other kid's been doing for years, getting through backyards to get home quicker, to a friend's house quicker, or possibly into a friend's house that the parents don't want him there. He's a it's an issue that this kid pursued. But you know what? And it brings you to a whole nother point. This is the newfound fascination with conservatism. Is the whole who is the more conservative? So it all started, if you ask me, it all started. I'm going back. I'm going to go into a segue now with Jeb Bush as governor interrupting the Schiavo's family decision to pull life support. It was the husband's decision to pull life support. He said, "I'm the most conservative candidate out there. I'm not going to allow this husband," which even if you overinterpret Christian doctrine, the husband has the right to make that decision. So, and the fact of the matter is that even the 12 apostles could have never anticipated life support. So we're going to somehow get into an interpretation that everybody's going to dissect into 9 different ways. But the fact of the matter is we have this governor who says, "I am not going to allow this husband to make the decision to pull this woman's life support." And he made it clear, "I'm the most conservative candidate for president." Then comes the whole stand your ground. "I'm going to sign this into law, even though everybody's expressed doubt that this is the right thing to do, because I'm the most conservative candidate. And you need to realize that somehow I'm going to prove that to you." And now we're on to that new momentum where the most conservative candidate of all time is the president of the United States doing crazy crap. And we're bleeding libtards because we're saying this is crazy. And it's like, wait a minute, it's crazy.
What do you think of all that, Beth?
No, I completely agree with Trippy, obviously. Uh, it seems though, no matter what uh, we say about MAGA or Trump, you tend to still back them, even though you don't agree with some of the things that they do. And that tends to be like a MAGA thing, because they believe that Trump is a Christian or evangelical when we really know he isn't.
And I hear you. My cautionary tale to the both of you is is that the ideological lens does not help this conversation. It all it does is it separates our audience into us and them. So either you are MAGA or a supporter of Trump or a conservative and identify that way, and therefore you're offended by what was just said, or you are a progressive, or as they would characterize a libtard, right? And you're like cheering it on, just like Beth, right? All I'm
Well,
saying to
my
you, no,
intention was not to offend. It was not to
no, no,
offend.
I
It was
agree.
just,
But your intention is not controlling, Beth. I wish it was. Believe me, anyone who would characterize themselves as a conservative, right, or a MAGA supporter or a Trump supporter is inclined to be offended by what we just said. I'm just saying.
But what
I
I
mean, the
just said,
idea of,
what I
yeah,
just said.
well, yes, that Beth supported. And the thing is, and what I'm trying to say is, I'm not trying to offend you two in this conversation. I'm trying to say this is, we need to be aware of what we're putting out and the impact, how is it going to be received? And
And
what I'm trying to say here is that these ideological lenses that interpret what we're talking about, that interpret what happens in our world, does divide us. And then we become Charlie Brown's teacher to the other side. They don't hear what we're saying if we are taking it from the perspective of progressive good, conservative bad. Okay, let's just understand that. And so can if we take that lens off for a second, if we take the labels off for a second, and we talk about what Trump did that we might find to be not thoughtful, that we find not to be we find to be stupid or whatever, that's just the facts. We're not talking about the ideological approach that fed into this decision to do any number one of the things that we're talking about. And so that's all I'm saying to us is that if we want to have a constructive conversation that the audience would want to participate in, it's imperative that we stay as close to the actual events that actually happened that we want to talk about. We've been talking about stand your ground. I don't think I did not approach it, and we weren't approaching it before from the perspective of who supported it. We were approaching it from the content of the issue
And
itself.
I made that
And
mistake of doing that, but the only thing is the only reason I used it as a good opportunity to wield my liberal sword is because it's just I want to get back to just what you said. Let's take off the divisive lens. And so and when we were team building, walking around Disney, talking, one of the things I said is how do we bring the two parties together? And I felt strongly about this. I felt even though Doge was an acronym, even though Doge, which for the most part was nomenclature, and it was just only it didn't really amount to much. It still should be. I would love to see government analyze social programs as enabling or as something that's really cost efficient. So one of the things, like I said is, okay, so we have a school debt college relief. Kids can go to college, right? And essentially one way or another, through a Pell Grant or through a college loan or through concerned parents, they can get a 4-year degree. But is that going to amount to a lot these days is my question. And I said maybe there's other ways. So one of the things I said that could bring the two parties together, if supposedly we don't want to be the two leadership parties that somehow collude in creating the most giant petri dish that grows the underclass. If somehow we really want to be the two parties that come together and make our kids' future better than ours, how do we do that? And I said Doge may be the answer. We talk about government efficiencies. Would it be positive to offer kids instead of a student loan a small business loan to expand their parents' business, to ultimately take over their parents' business and expand it, like Charlie Koch did with his father's business. He took over his father's business, and like he said, if you came on board with me, $1,000 would be $10 million today. So, so that's my point. Let me not just keep beating that point up, but how can we come together in a way where we say, okay, Republicans, you're not really digging social programs. Okay, Democrats, you're really progressive. Where do we meet in the middle and come to a conclusion where we really just need to start moving things forward?
what do you think, Beth? How do we come together?
Well, that's the point that I was getting at with, when I say MAGA, they they are quick to blame Democrats. They're quick to just not like someone who um, proclaims to be liberal just by not even knowing them, just by their political stance. I've noticed, and this is not to be, it's not to be mean or nasty, but I do notice that you are quick to judge um, our liberal presidents past, even George Bush, people who are not on, um, let's say, Donald Trump's good side or on his fan base. But I've never, anytime we've ever said, hey, can you critique Trump? You just always go back to, well, it's a Janis Joplin, nothing left to lose. I don't agree with his antics, but you never critique the actions that he does. And I feel like that's like a supporter thing, like a MAGA thing. And until you can admit that things that he is doing is wrong, we can't we can't agree on anything. And I'm not saying specifically you. I mean, it's almost like I don't want to say cult because that's so divisive, but it is, you have to admit when wrong is wrong and right is right. And I feel like Democrats have felt like they don't have their politicians fighting for them, and they have a right to feel that way. They have been lax. They haven't been fighting. I don't know. I think that there's more to like the political donors and the power than all of us want to admit. But like with this First Amendment thing, with the Jimmy Kimmel thing, like wrong is wrong, and only 1/10 of Trump supporters are coming out and saying, yeah, that's probably too far. I mean, like, you know what I mean? What at what point do we as Americans say no, the Constitution is the Constitution and we should all be in line with what it entails and not defend just blatant hypocrisy. Do you know what I mean?
No, I hear you, Beth, and there's a lot of good content in there. So, if Coach, if you could give me an opportunity to respond to Beth,
Go
because I
ahead.
think it
Yeah,
was really
absolutely.
thoughtful. I think she laid it out there. A couple of things on the critique of Trump. We have had entire episodes where we eviscerated Trump, all four of us, because our man Charlie's not here today, on the big beautiful bill. Okay. As people can see in my nameplate on my screen, right? I have a consulting business called Climate Changes Everything. We have had episodes here where I've completely eviscerated Trump on his climate denialism. So it's not that I don't critique Trump, but that doesn't mean that I don't support him. In the same way that I voted for Obama twice, and I completely eviscerate him for his failings. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is, and again, the question that went to Beth was, how do we bring us together? And I can tell you this much: the idea that it's that the only side that's judging anyone is MAGA judging the progressives is okay. What does the history show us? I mean, it was the Democratic nominee for president in 2016 who referred to the MAGA supporters as the deplorables. Right? Okay, do we forget? Right? It is the Democratic Party who's perfected over 25 years this notion of identity politics. And let's unpack that phrase for a second. Identity politics speaks to who deserves support. And it defines it as the historically disenfranchised, notwithstanding the fact that other people who are not historically disenfranchised are currently disenfranchised, such as the white working class. So, right when the white working class got disenfranchised by Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama by deindustrializing the country, the Democrats turned around and called people who were white privileged. So just imagine how it would radicalize you if you were having a hard time earning the kind of living that your father earned and you're right, and yet you could not take care of yourself and your family the way you were accustomed to, and people are characterizing you as privileged and saying you're ineligible to get the kind of assistance that historically disadvantaged people get, like the BIPOC community. Okay, so the idea that the Democrats are not judging the conservatives, that Democrats are not judging MAGA is ahistorical. You would think that nothing, we just woke up today, nothing happened yesterday or the day before, and this is where we are. So that's my response. This does not bring us together. We have been judging each other. We have weaponized everything that makes us unique. Whether you're black, white, man, woman, gay, trans, whatever you are, we have weaponized it. So how do we come together? We come together by appealing to our shared humanity. Okay? The one thing that the whole range of things that we don't seem to ever talk about is all of us need each other. Why? Because we don't produce the food we eat. We don't produce the clothes we wear. We don't produce the cars we drive, right? All of us can perfect our skills and offer those skills in exchange for money. And then we take that money and buy the things that we need to live our lives that other people produce, that we're not capable of producing ourselves. This is the actual reason why we need MAGA Nation. And that MAGA Nation needs the progressives. It's because we are contributing to the society that benefits all of us. So you want to bring us together? Start talking to people like they're humans, because all of us are humans. All of us don't create the air we breathe. Okay. Approach it from that perspective and then everyone can see themselves in what you're saying. But using these labels immediately separates us into us versus them. And the problem with us versus them is them never is treated fair.
So
Them does not get afforded the same rights that us, that we deserve. And that's what we do in this country. And that's why we never can solve anything. So let's
You
appeal to
believe that
humanity.
all of us are them? Like it's no longer like Democrats and Republicans or left and right. It is top and bottom. It's rich versus it's the ultra wealthy versus the rest of us. So it
I,
is getting to that point.
so let me jump in real quick. Let
I
me
agree
just
with
say
that, Beth. I absolutely agree
I
with
agree with
that.
both of you. Let me tell you something. I'm going to read an email to you in a minute, but I'm going to tell you what I think. I think we have an opportunity and a responsibility as podcasters and realists to make a difference, to unravel not just 25 years of tension, but literally going back on 50 years of tension since the New Deal. And now to be the crazy, broken down old man, I'm going to say this quickly. I'm going to say it quickly, but not mean it as everything. We went from the New Deal to the screw deal. We're unraveling the New Deal. And that's the momentum now. Now we have an opportunity. We're in a position where I don't need ABC. I don't need any TV channel. I can do this podcast and publish it on YouTube. I don't need to be a well-connected actor or talk show host to do what we're doing. We don't need it. So let me tell you what we are doing and what we are accomplishing. So the other day I got an email from a potential podcast host, potential podcast guest. She said, your recent episode with Kevin, Beth, and Charlie was such a compelling listen. The discussion around the deepening divide in American society, especially how immigration policy and international tensions like those with Iran can shape our future, really struck me. I appreciated how you navigated through the complexities behind figures like Pam Bondi and addressed the unity and democracy mean in this turbulent moment. As someone who spent years weaving history and contemporary politics together, I see real power in putting today's polarizing landscape into historical context. My work explores these intersections. That's all I'm going to. It goes on. It's a great email. But what she's saying is we're doing good. Even though we do graze the surface, and even though I am a broken down old man, frustrated as hell with a lot of things going on today, I try to convey a positive point for the most part. That there is room, there is wiggle room to work together. I'm not absolutely adamantly opposed to Donald Trump, but when I point out what I am opposed to, the first thing that comes to mind is Pete Hegseth. When he literally stood at a Pentagon podium and said, there's people with Trump disorder, stress derangement disorder, talking about how the Iran mission, nobody knows how our pilots trained and worked so hard for us. I did know that it was a 32-hour flight. I did know that they had college campus refrigerators in the cockpit and bathrooms to make it 32 hours across the globe. And I know how accurate and how much training it takes to drop those bunker busting. The problem is we weren't critiquing our pilots, and the spin that the Secretary of Defense made was all we're doing is disregarding Trump's great success story. It wasn't a great success story. They've already dug out the third tunnel. They managed to move a bunch of uranium before we ever got to the tunnels. It's stored somewhere else in this giant country called Iran. We will never find it, and they will be able to not only make it bomb grade plutonium, but they will get the triggers they need to attach them to missiles. So when we talk about this mission, as we're saying, it wasn't what Trump perceived it or portrayed it to be. We're only doing our due diligence when we're questioning our leaders. Did you make the right decision? Can we not make the same mistake twice if it was a mistake? But there comes the issue of, again, the diversity of, is it Trump derangement disorder? Is it over criticizing a politician? We have made a history of tearing apart politicians' lives and their reputations and their careers and their decisions. We did it to Robert Bork in the Supreme Court hearings. We did it to Justice Clarence Thomas in the Supreme Court hearings. We the only times we didn't do it is generally when it was Sandra Day O'Connor or Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who seem to be kinder to women when it comes to Supreme Court hearings than we are to men, which is fine with me. I think women should run the world. I think they bring life, and all men really bring to this world is death and destruction. But the fact of the matter is to say sometimes we get a little too divisive. We may get a little too divisive in our comments, but it's only to dig deep into what's going on.
I support, first and foremost, particularly within the context of our tradition. It is our role in a democracy, in a functioning democracy, to critique our leaders and hold them to account. Where the only critique, and again, anyone wants to go back to any number of our shows that we've now done over the course of this year, you'll see where my critique is. The limits of the critique, in my opinion, is when we try to characterize what Trump is doing as something that's never been done before. Never been done before. There are things he's doing that's never been done before, but this notion that he's shredding the Constitution in a way that no president has done before, right, is the stuff that I push back on. The actual critique. So, in the specific thing you're saying here, Coach Drippy, about his attack on the Iranian nuclear facilities. We've had that conversation. I totally support what you're saying. It was an abject failure. It all it did was give Iran justification to disavow the nuclear non-proliferation treaty. And so, okay, that's okay. I agree with you, and we should critique him for that. I don't think that's a problem. The fact that Trump might complain that people critique him, the fact that some supporters of Trump might complain that people critique him, is not, in my opinion, worthy of our dispute, of our conversation, because I think a president, that's a part of the job, is to be held to account. So I'm not going to push back on that, but I just think that, let's cautionary tale. Let's not act as if every president does not exercise their presidential prerogative to expand the power of the presidency under the Constitution. When Beth makes reference to the Constitution and protecting the Constitution, it's not self-evident to every person what that means. Every person has their own interpretation, and every president, based on the advice of counsel, exercises their authority. And the thing is, the brilliance of our constitutional system is that that's how it's supposed to work. A president is not intentionally being unconstitutional by exercising their prerogative. The separations of power is supposed to then exercise their prerogative, and where those tensions meet is what the Constitution means, right?
So let
This is the
Beth
kind. Yes,
respond.
that's right.
Yes.
I feel like we are, when you talk about the things that everyday Americans are struggling with, specifically affordable housing, everyday living, not being able to, not having $1,000 for an emergency. Every American who is struggling or who is in that position should all be on the same side. There should be no question. What I'm saying is, well, I think what we've always said is, what, in your opinion, makes everybody, the 50% of women and blacks and men and all these people who have decided Trump is their man, I still don't see, you would think at this point in his presidency, out of everything that he's already done, nothing has been for the people. It hasn't lowered prices, hasn't made housing more affordable, but yet we still give him pass after pass after pass. That is what I don't understand. I can't get over that. We don't at one point go, yeah, that's not cool. He's not doing what we said or what he said he would do. And now we have to hold him to account. Now what? We can't just say, well, there's nothing left to lose. There's still a lot left to lose. The 2008 crash was huge and it was devastating. And we're not even close to how bad it was then. I mean, we're getting there, but he's not doing us. My point is, I guess, why do we continue to still defend him when he has done nothing to lower prices, nothing to make life easier for any of us? Why are we still allowing that and giving him a pass?
Okay, so Beth, I think that's a totally valid. I totally hear you. Okay, so and we continue to have this conversation. What he's doing, first and foremost, not an excuse. This is the ninth month of his presidency. first and foremost. Anything that you try to do on the macroeconomic level, you're changing a $27 trillion economy, okay, is going to have short-term effects and long-term effects. It takes a while to implement, okay? And so what he's actually doing that the people who elected him wanted him to do, the first thing was to dismantle the infrastructure of the federal government that was put in place, over the last 30 years that no longer served the American public. And we have seen him do that. He has fired thousands of federal employees. Now, the problem is, and this is the critique, is he often throws the baby out of the bathwater. I mean, the mass is of fire. He's not using, it's not surgical. Okay, it's absolute. Okay, but but that's one thing he's done, and his supporters appreciate it. Okay, another thing he's done is he has closed the border. Right. The problem with what happened before him in the Biden administration is that they let 8 to 10 million undocumented people enter the country in 4 years, doubling the undocumented population in the United States at a time where people are really struggling. Right. So, okay. And so his supporters really appreciate that. Okay. On the economic side, lowering costs. Okay. His effort to lower costs is to reverse globalization. It is globalization allowing American companies to take the jobs for production, manufacturing, and everything overseas to the lower cost markets. What that has done is left American labor with a range of quality jobs, and therefore their income has declined in real terms for 30 years. And so, how do you help those people? How he's helping those people is he's trying to his tariff the radicalization of tariffs make it not profitable for Apple and other American multinational corporations to use low cost labor and then charge a premium in the US market for a massive profit. He's gutting that profit, which will force those companies, once those tariffs become permanent, will force those companies to move the manufacturing jobs back to the United States. That is not a solution that's going to happen in 9 months, right? As where we stand right now, the US Supreme Court will rule on his ability to issue out tariffs under emergency authority. I've said multiple times, he will lose that case. What that will then do is push it back to the Congress, who has the authority to do taxes, and a tariff is considered a tax. Okay, the Republican-controlled Congress will then give the president the authority to do that. That will send a signal to American corporations that the tariffs are real. He's going to impose them. We're not going to be able to make the money we used to make using foreign labor and then selling in the US market. Let's bring the manufacturing back to the States. That will play out over a series of years. His supporters understand that, okay? But that's what he's actually doing. Okay, okay, to end the forever wars. Who fights these wars? It is the working class of America who has been at war for 30 years, 20 years in Afghanistan alone, accomplished nothing. The only people who benefited from all these wars is extreme wealth. They're the ones who sell the weapons. They're the military industrial complex,
So
which
let
is
me
primarily owned by BlackRock. So what is he doing? All his entire foreign policy has been to try to negotiate the end of the war in Ukraine, to negotiate the end of the genocide in Gaza and stuff like that. It hasn't been even because guess what? The infrastructure in the federal government over the last 30 years, the neocons and neoliberals, they are supporters of the forever wars. And you see them fighting him tooth and nail, even in his own party, right? To continue the war in Ukraine, to go to war against China. So he is fighting within his own government to end the forever wars. That's why he appointed Tulsi Gabbard the head of national intelligence. So what I'm trying to say is he is doing real things that his supporters actually see. Have they had the effect yet? No. And they wouldn't. Not when you're talking about complex issues for a $27 trillion economy.
So many things to respond to. Let me unpack one thing at a time. One, I'm thankful we're not in a constitutional crisis. Maybe just because the Supreme Court is rubber stamping everything he's done so far. Maybe that's the reason we're not in a constitutional crisis. I'm not arguing that point, but what I'm saying is we are concerned about a constitutional. The other thing is now let's talk about what other presidents have done. When it comes to the Jimmy Kimmel thing, real briefly. So I've always asked a question during the Obama administration. AT&T was going to buy T-Mobile. The contract was such a done deal, sure deal, swiftly going to be approved by government that AT&T agreed to pay T-Mobile $4 billion if the deal falls through. So I always beg the question, what really pinched Obama's nerve to nix the deal? Was it something AT&T didn't do for the administration? Because nobody saw that coming. Because I can assure you, if AT&T thought there was some question of that thing happening, they wouldn't have agreed to the $4 billion penalty. So when we talk about the FCC commissioner threatening certain entertainment companies, if you don't pull a certain channel, we're going to make sure you don't get merger deals you're desperately seeking. We're going to nix those deals. Did something tell Obama nix the AT&T T-Mobile deal for some reason, and we've never dug that deep into Obama like we do Trump. We've never dug the integrity issue with Obama like we do Trump. So I'm agreeing with you essentially. So so that comes to mind when I think of that. You're a venture capitalist. You may know the answer to that question I'm posing. What pinched Obama's nerve to nix that deal? And he said it was competition. I find it hard to believe, but uh, it may be. I mean, truthfully, I've been a T-Mobile customer since then, ever since then, and actually, well, of course, they had $4 billion cash infusion to build towers and buy companies and do a better job.
Oh, maybe we'll look into that, Coach, and have that in a future
But I'm
conversation.
just
Because
saying,
on
in
the
comparison, in
yes,
contrast to one administration versus another, we have an FCC, an overbearing FCC chairman that is saying. But then comes the other point I was making is that FCC chairman can threaten these stations, and we have an issue with his threat. The problem is next when then Trump hears the whole argument, he says anybody talks bad about me, and I'm going to pull your licenses. And then we say, well, that's like a little kid running up to another kid in school and saying, I'm going to punch you in the face, but he never does. Well, you know what? Trump does punch people in the face. And that's why we question and get concerned when he says things like that. You know, if the
well,
little kid says it, the principal says, don't ever talk to another child like that. And the little kid, or you'll be suspended. And his mom comes to school and says, what in the world? Where did you learn that? Suddenly he wakes up. Trump, there is no awakening. There is no change your ways, sir. You are the president. There is some level of decorum expected from you as the president of the United States.
okay, we've had that conversation. You're not going to expect it from Trump. Trump is Trump. But here's the thing. First and foremost, okay, let me just get some clarity. It wasn't, was it Jimmy Kimmel who was fired?
I no, that's the ones I get. I don't know anymore. I get all three names
No,
It
confused.
was Jimmy Kimmel was taken off the air, yes.
It was Jimmy
it,
Kimmel taking off
it
the air.
was Kimmel.
Definitely.
Okay.
Well, Colbert was his show ends in a year or April, something like that. This is the last season. But Kimmel was
So,
taken off indefinitely, yeah.
I just want to say, first and foremost, and you talk about an abuse of the Constitution. Okay, it is not a violation of First Amendment rights that a person who works for, who's a spokesperson, who's a representative of a multinational corporation says something controversial and they lose their job, right? If I can tell you, if the CEO of Apple, right, made a comment relating to the recent assassination we just had, right, that maybe suggested that he deserved it or something like that. I can assure you the board of Apple computers would remove that person from his job. In the same way that if you represent a network, a television network, okay, and so this is what's happening. If the FCC, if the FCC threatened to remove the license because of what he said, now I think you're now starting to approach a First Amendment issue
No, they threatened
because
to nix some merger deals. I think. I think.
no,
I'm not on any
I'm just
board. I'm
saying,
just saying what I'm reading
but
through through dissecting through
the
all the paperwork.
decision by that company to fire the late show host, right, right, is not a violation of the First Amendment. Again, any person working a job, right, who says something that would negatively impact the image of the company will lose
No,
their jobs, and
absolutely.
that's
But my
perfectly
point
well.
is
It's no different for the late show host. That's all I'm
the
saying.
point is
I'm saying
no,
it's
I
not a First
agree.
Amendment
I
issue.
agree with whatever the decisions are and whatever works. That's not the point. The point is the Trump expounding on it to the next level. If you talk
Well,
bad about him,
what? Okay,
no
okay.
other president would have done that, and that becomes where the diversity comes.
But okay, hold on now. Whether another president would not have commented on things that happen in the private sector and stuff like that. There's just too many examples to count, right? But what I'm trying to say here is whether another president has said something like that or not is that the basis of criticism? Trump is Trump. What part of his appeal is he says things that politicians don't say. What that says to people
He's
is
talking
Hang on,
about.
let
he's
Beth
a
go.
human. He's like us. He
Let
doesn't
Beth
he
jump in
doesn't
though,
stay
because
within the lines.
this is what
We're
I
not just we're not just talking about him having Kimmel taken off the air, or it's more of like the fear of the merger. Yeah, it was the company, but we're talking about him not allowing the AP back in the press briefing room. Like him, if a reporter asks him a question he doesn't like, he's an idiot, or he's a fool, or like we're talking the a man with the thinnest skin on the planet as the president is supposed to be uh, allowed free speech. That was he's bringing back free speech because the left took it away. No, no, he's not bringing back free speech. He's taking away the First Amendment, and there is no like, um, there's not a question. That is exactly what it is.
yeah, it's just a concern. It's just a concern. It's not an over critique. It's just a concern. And
No,
everybody's
no,
gonna, everybody wants the president to have great success. Let me tell you what, when you say 9 months isn't enough to judge his new approach to the idea of reinventing the economy, I agree 9 months isn't enough. When you look at General Electric, for example, they're going on 15 years of reinventing the company, and now they went from $20 a share to literally at today's price is $301 a share. They got out of fight mortgages and banking in general. They got back into manufacturing. They reinvented the company to the point where the company's succeeding again. A president cannot. First of all, this is a big undertaking for a president that could possibly run for re-election. He would at least have 6 years with the 2-year lame duck session. Trump's got 4 years and he's a lame duck in two. And there's concern from Republicans now. Even Ted Cruz is mentioning concern that so now you're starting to waver. So if he literally only has 2 years to take on this grand undertaking of reinventing how we do business in America, and then we literally follow through at a level of dissension that Democrats take back the White House, we're going to go right back full circle again to old school, so that the approach that he's taking on to reinvent the economy, to reinvigorate the middle class, it's never going to take shape. It can't in 2 years. It's like you said, we're almost all agreeing on the timeline's not there. Now, as far as the tariffs, I also believe he's going to lose the case in the Supreme Court. I believe only because I'm looking at the judges. I'm looking at um, Amy Comey Barrett. I'm looking at Judge Roberts. So I think he may only yield two votes on the tariff case, and that would be Daniel Alito and Clarence Thomas. And then he's lost. But now you're saying it's going to go to Congress, and Congress is going to approve it. There's a lot of concern about what Congress is willing to do for President Donald Trump any longer. And if the tariffs don't pass, they could possibly pass in the House. So let's just say hypothetically, because we're talking in total hypothetics now. He loses the case in the Supreme Court. It goes to the Congress. He could possibly pass in the House. You're not only looking at a meager margin in the Senate, but you're looking at, for one, Rand Paul, and the other, I'm literally forgetting her name now. She's more of a centrist than a Democrat or a Republican. Susan Connell. They may not even
Collins.
Collins. They may not
Yes, from
even
Maine.
vote. They may not even vote his way on the tariffs in the Senate.
Coach,
So then
Lindsey
you've got,
Graham, Lindsey Graham has said over and over again that he has 80 votes in the Senate to impose massive
but do you
bone, as
believe
he
Lindsey Graham? I'm
characterized.
just ask
Yeah,
that question.
no, no, well, no. Okay, let's let it play out. What I'm trying to say here is that okay, Obama had a powerful mandate in terms of an electorate who was standing with him when he, in his first 2 years. Okay. Okay. Trump has a powerful mandate of the electorate that we've covered, cuts across every major demographic in the country, cuts across every region in the country. Okay. All right. The Congress, when the president is loses at the Supreme Court level, right? It will put the pressure on the Congress to support the mandate because what the American working class and the disenfranchised American middle class want is to reverse the globalization and bring the jobs back. And you cannot do it without the tariffs. Okay. So what I am trying to say to you here is do I know that it's going to happen? No.
No.
Do I is there actual work that we could see that shows that they're trying to do it, that they're preparing to do it, that he's preparing to do it? Yes. And so that's all I'm referring to.
No, I'm not saying. I'm just saying. Let's look back at our last prediction, which was actually on Ukraine. We predicted that the Bro Show, Putin and Trump was gonna twist Zelensky's arm, and it didn't happen. Didn't happen.
No, no, no,
Alaska went down, and Trump realized he doesn't yield the influence he thought he did with Putin,
no, no,
and
hold
then
it.
Putin followed through.
That's not a good characterization,
I'm
coach.
just saying our
Because
predictions are
our
not.
prediction, no, no, but the idea is we can't speak for Zelensky. Okay. When what why Zelensky is free to say no and that Trump can't control him is because neocons and neoliberals in the United States and our NATO partners in Europe encourage Zelensky to say no and that we will stand with him. While Trump is telling him you need to end this because you don't have any cards, you're losing, right?
So did you
Okay,
read the
so you're
recent
absolutely
article? Did you read the
no,
recent
no.
article? Trump's considering giving Zelensky the missiles that will land on Moscow and Red Square.
Okay, like I said, that's more neocon, neoliberal propaganda
No, he
nonsense.
said it.
I
He
will,
entertained
no,
the
no, no.
thought.
I will. He is at struggle against these people in his own administration. So he vacillates. It does look like he vacillates because it is a power struggle. This is what the mistake about bombing Iran's nuclear sites were. This was the neocons and saying, look, we could set them back for years if you just do this now, and then that puts us in a better negotiating position to solve the issue with Israel.
We've
Okay,
consumed the
yeah,
floor. Let's
no,
let
no,
Beth
let
on.
me just finish
Go
what I'm
ahead, finish.
saying.
Go ahead,
We're going to
finish.
give Beth every opportunity. So all I'm saying here is one last point, Coach, is that okay, if we all agree that the Supreme Court is going to reject his position on the tariffs because he's using emergency authority and there's no emergency that justifies a permanent change in the tariff laws of the United States, right? Then can we stop saying every time the Supreme Court does something that supports Trump they're
Absolutely.
rubber stamping Trump? They're not rubber stamping. Okay, this is the
I'll stop
Constitution
saying
at
it if I
work.
see that, but I want to see the ruling, the written ruling too, because I
They've
have
ruled
a.
against him before. They ruled against him
They have.
on the lack of due process for
They
the person.
certainly have.
I'm
Absolutely.
just I'm saying. So that's the
I'm
Constitution at
not
work. Okay.
knocking,
So now
never
it's all
knocking.
Beth.
I'm never knocking conservative justices up until I talk about two in particular. And then I have a lot of critique that can go on two in particular. But there's four at the moment that I highly respect. So there's seven judges I highly respect at the moment.
Yeah, I join you particularly with the
I'm
critique
not
of
naming
Clarence
names
Thomas.
even because I'm
We
trying
we
not to. I'm
we should
trying
we
not
should
to.
have
Curious
a whole
though.
show on Clarence
You can't
Thomas
be Alito.
uh,
Well, I can tell you,
Alito.
I've literally read numerous books on Clarence Thomas, and the one thing I found the most interesting is the reason he was picked at the time. He literally called and said, "Am I the black judge?" And they said, "No, actually, You were our pick in front of David Souter, but you were not on the Fifth Court of Appeals long enough to nominate you at that point. So we went with David Souter. Now it's your turn." But the reason it was his turn so vehemently is because he went to school to be a priest. Now, granted, he did not finish
Right.
school, but he did go to school to be a priest,
Clarence
and
Thomas.
Clarence Thomas. Yeah, I've read his
Eh,
book. I was fascinated to hear that. And then I always said, because in one of his books he talks about as a child he was nicknamed ABC, which is America's Blackest Child. And I said when it came time for the pick to be the next Chief Justice, they were talking about elevating Antonin Scalia, and I said, why are they thinking about Clarence Thomas? And I always said that must be ABC, anybody but Clarence. And I always felt it was because he was black that he was never going to be the Chief Justice, because really he followed the George Bush theory, he'll never turn on me. But they did not. They brought in a new guy, not only nominated him to the court, but then when the Chief Justice stepped down, they said, hang on, let's pull the nomination, let's make him the nominee for the Chief Justice. I said, wait a minute, there's a lot of consideration if this ever comes to happen that it would be Antonin Scalia elevated. Why is there, and it's unusual to elevate somebody, it's unusual to actually bring in a new guy to that position. Why was there never a discussion of elevating him? So I always question the integrity of the Republican Party in that decision. But Beth, take the floor.
Well, I actually want to go back to when we were discussing the things that Trump is doing that everybody voted for. And I do have a question about immigration. So many were fed up with the immigration, that there were so many immigrants here. And I'm just really curious, what is it about the immigrants that was so destructive to America?
And that's a great question, Beth. All you need to do is look at the budgets of the magnet cities around the United States. Look what it's done to the budget of New York City. When you're talking about, again, doubling the national, undocumented immigrant population in the United States in 4 years. So what did Texas do with this flood that came into their state? What they did was they shipped people to New York. They shipped people to
But
California.
we're talking
Okay.
about,
So what do you think? No, no, seriously. What do you think these people do, right? When now they're in the country, right? They don't have a capacity to take care of themselves, right? I mean, how does it hurt? There's a finite amount
no,
of
no,
American
I'm
resources.
serious. No, I am dead serious
Yeah.
because I have heard others complain about how immigrants got free phones, and got free hotel rooms, and got free, and really, it wasn't that Americans didn't want us helping those immigrants with that. We're talking about a couple of $1,000 maybe. They
Yes,
were
at a
feeling like,
time when the average American is struggling themselves. I mean, seriously, you're
yes,
talking
but
millions
but
of
but,
people.
but no, we're talking about the people who have come in. If we allowed them to work and make a living, when they work, they pay into Social Security, yet they don't get the benefit of those of that that benefit. They don't get Social Security. They don't get, but they pay it, and they pay into taxes. And what I'm curious about is, if say we send all the immigrants back, we actually, the big thing is, like, we're losing income for Social Security because we won't raise the cap on it, on Social Security. But they do pay. It's like something like $2 billion that they
Beth, the
pay, that
answer,
they don't get that money.
Beth, the answer to your question, and I hear your point about that, and there's an answer, but in terms of how it impacts, there are an explosion in this country of Americans who are struggling to make ends meet. 12, according to the Census Bureau's housing survey, right? 12% of American households are food insecure. You
I
have
agree.
a majority of American households who are suffering under the weight of the worst housing affordability crisis in history. Okay, okay. At that time, we have also shredded the social safety net. That didn't start with Donald J. Trump, right? That started with Bill Clinton in the 90s, shredding the social safety net. Okay, right. But and we can have a whole show on that. What I'm trying to say here is, when you take 8 to 10 million new undocumented people, right? their capacity to transition in our society is the social safety net of America. And the
Right, but
idea,
I'm
no, this is the answer to your question. The idea that it did not have an impact on Americans, that the fact that we now need to help these additional 8 to 10 people, 8 to 10 million people who are migrated to our cities. Okay, okay, right. It did have an impact on them, and it had an impact on the budgets and the local governments and stuff like that. So that's the impact.
and so now we're not paying for them.
Well,
Those people
no,
that
with this, they
we're not
are here. Getting them out is a whole other different story, right? But that's
but that's my point. That's my point. We have people were upset because they felt like we were giving them too much. We were giving them a room and board and money and a phone and all this. But now in a prison where we're still paying for their room and board and their, but we're not reaping any of the migrant benefits. And when you say we're having a crisis of people not being able to afford food, they're food insecure, they can't afford houses. I am with you all day long. And the big, beautiful bill is making that worse.
worse.
It's taking more
Guys, I'm
benefits from people who are already food insecure. What you're going to say, Trippy? Was that you?
Yeah, I wanted to respond to one thing about New York. So when Governor Cuomo made the No King speech, he prefaced, we pay more into the federal government than Texas. So keep in mind, and now let's talk about the free phones. Keep in mind, the free phones fall under almost a category of DOGE, Department of Government. It was under analyzation by the New York legislators. It was a no-bid contract to provide illegal immigrants with phone cards. The New York legislators said this contract is garbage, and we are it's called a rescission essentially. We are taking it back, even though we haven't spent the whole $57 million. We are stopping it, so it's a rescission. And so then came the Trump's only been in office 48 hours and they already got New York City to stop giving free phone cards to the immigrants. And it's like, and I said, pause. It had nothing to do with him. I'm not knocking the guy, but stop holding him high on this mantle. He just doesn't belong. That's all I'm saying. Hang on, call me overly critical, but the New York legislator was analyzing this program from the beginning. They argued it, don't put it in place. And then they said, look, it was a no bid contract, and this company is not even delivering 10% of the $57 million or whatever of the, not necessarily 10%, but whatever the $57 million was. We're pulling back the program. So it wasn't Trump that did it, right? Then comes the when we say you're talking about a governor that made it clear we are going to provide these immigrants with these things at the cost of New York taxpayers' money. Now, keep in mind how New York gets their money from taxes derived from New York residents. So when you live in New York, you pay a state income tax, you pay a federal income tax. You literally pay a tax if you live on Long Island and work in New York City. That's an additional tax.
The city tax.
So
That's
these
exactly right.
residents, these people of New York are saying, go, Governor Cuomo, go. So no one, and the idea, the notion was the No King speech from Governor Cuomo was nobody asked Trump for the money to provide a single thing to these immigrants. Nobody asked the federal, as he was saying, we are doing this with our own money, and we're also paying into the federal system more than Texas. So when Texas lateraled these people to New York, no one argued Texas is doing the wrong thing. Now comes, so we're kind of taking two different arguments. Did we allow people that shouldn't be allowed in the country? Did Biden openly not do something about it to cater to the progressives? Yes, and we own that. No one said Trump's not going to be strong on immigration. What we did say is when Trump told Congress, don't pass the one bill Biden's willing to sign into law, essentially a strong bill on immigration. Trump
No, it
said
wasn't.
it
No,
wasn't
it
okay,
wasn't.
but Trump said Biden, it wasn't okay. That's I can't say the specifics of the bill. Allegedly, it had some teeth, but if it didn't, it didn't. But Biden was willing to sign it, and Trump said, "Do not let it get to his desk because I want immigration to be an issue on the campaign trail," which is fine. Trump played his hand
Oh,
well
did
and
you
won
work
the
for the
election.
Kamala campaign? Because
That
that's her
was
argument. That was her argument, and it's
And it's
complete and
not necessarily an
utter. No,
argument.
wait
It
up.
was
It's complete and
it's
utter nonsense. If we, you can't have it both ways. If The Biden administration reversed Trump's immigration policy, and they did, right? And it let in 8 to 10 million people.
It
Full
did.
stop. No, stop. Full stop. That's the problem. That's the problem that they're saying, oh, we were going to solve the problem that we created by this tissue paper, Swiss cheese, legislation that would have given them just said, oh, well, look what we did when the 8 to 10 million people are already here. Stop it. Okay, that's all I'm saying to you.
100%
Okay.
agreed. That's all I'm saying. 100% agreed. But let's go back to 100% agreed. We've given Trump the credit. But let's also say where I've done the contrast. President Bill Clinton and President Barack Obama combined deported 1.5 million people based on illegal activity, based on the fact that they were not abiding by the laws of our country. And they did it in a way where due process was followed. All I've ever argued is do what you're doing, Donald Trump, follow due process. The reason the argument came so to light was the Abrego Garcia case. There was no need to go
Coach,
down
see,
this
this is the
rabbit hole.
revisionism. Obama's immigration policy was challenged by progressives in court. He was separating families.
No one's
So
arguing
no, no,
that.
no. What I'm saying is you're making the argument because President Trump's immigration policy is challenged in court and he loses some cases. This happened to Obama too. It's not like Trump is not using due process, but Obama did. That's what I'm talking about.
That's a
Okay,
point.
so
It's well made. The problem is I
no,
wasn't making that point. The problem was I was just
that's
saying
what but see, that's what you laced your comment with
I
to
did lace it with
frame.
that, but I'm just saying combine
Okay,
two
let's take that
Democratic
out
presidents.
then.
Take
Let's
it
just
out.
take that out.
Whatever you
Okay,
call it. Vet
because
it. Vet it.
let's
Take it
vet that
out.
out.
Or leave
Exactly.
it in for all and accept
And
accept
let's go
my
back to New York. Let's go back to
okay.
New York because I'm a native New Yorker. I'm born and raised in the
So
Bronx,
would you
right?
okay,
Okay.
let's go back
Okay.
to it.
So
Would you
yeah,
vote for
no, no,
Cuomo?
no, whole time. Hell no. Yeah, but let's continue, right? Okay, I'm gonna go out on the ledge and I'm going to speak to the millions of working class people in New York City, for example, right, who pay federal taxes, who pay state taxes, who pay city taxes, and they have to live in the ghetto somewhere in order to avoid having to sleep on someone's couch. That's the kind of life that they live,
I
right? Okay.
agree.
No,
But the
no, no, no,
point
let me
is
finish.
the
No,
only
let
point
me make my
okay, go
statement.
ahead.
Okay. Speaking on behalf of them, they are not cheering for 1 million people to come into New York City that the city and the state have to subsidize in order to integrate them into the economy. They're not cheering for that. What those people are looking for is their government that they pay taxes into to help them. They help them at a time they're under crisis. This is the problem. It's not that people are misogynist, hate immigrants, it's that they have one nostril above the water, and the government that they pay taxes in is inviting other people who have to be helped. Okay.
But
But
I
Now,
that was my
agree.
another
point. That was the exact point I was making. It's not that Americans uh didn't want to just help immigrants. It's that they wanted that extra help. They wanted
yes,
that money going to them, and it
that's
and it won't. It
well,
never
that's
will.
why they
It wouldn't in New
oppose.
York's
But Beth, that's why they oppose the immigrants in the first place. It's not because they're biased against them. There's
But
only
we weren't.
finite
That's not what we
resources.
were told. Yeah, but that's not what we were told. We were told
What?
they were rapists. That's not what we were
No,
told.
no.
We
I'm
were
not talking about how Trump has talked about the issue. I'm talking about what Americans feel about the issue. Why the majority of Americans support Trump's immigration policy. They don't
right.
support it because they think that immigrants are rapists and stuff like that. They support it because the government resources, scarce resources that
But
people who are in desperate need are having to
I
be
completely
reallocated.
understand. I
Well, then
completely
that's
understand. But
why
that
we have.
those resources, instead of saying, "Hey," and instead of helping these people, we need more help. But
Yes,
yes, but that is
but now they're here.
going on
What are
with
we
Trump. But
supposed to do?
well, now we're spending 10 times as much to hold them in a alligator Alcatraz or whatever it's
Yes,
called,
we're trying to get them
or
out of the country.
into
well we're
And Americans
into
support
countries
that.
where they did not come from. And
well
my
we're
question is, I feel like it's because of, I don't want to say ignorance, but they don't really know that when they come to work here, they actually pay taxes. They actually help the economy. They
Beth, you're
take
conflating
jobs.
two issues. Do you look, the
Well, we're hang
established,
on.
and no, no, ho, she is speaking to every major blue chip economist who's looked at immigration is agrees with what Beth is saying, that immigrants net are a plus to our economy. This is absolutely right. That they contribute far more than the benefits they take out. What is obscured in what Beth is saying, and why I'm saying she's conflating these two issues, is that when an immigrant shows up at our door, it takes them a while to get into the position where they contribute more than they take out. In the beginning, in the ramp up period, right, it's mostly they're taking out. Why? Because they're trying to integrate into the society, to find jobs, to get traction in terms of what they contribute. But in terms of the established immigrants, yes, they are a huge net positive, and we have been subsidized by them for years,
Well,
right?
hang on.
And therefore we shouldn't hate them. But when you allow the most recent number of immigrants to double the population, you're talking about doubling the portion of the population that require national, state, local subsidies in order to integrate, because if we don't help them, they will turn to crime. Why? Because they need to eat. Right? Okay,
Okay, hang on.
so
But let me make a point though, because what you just made was a great point. The startup cost money. So that could be equated with capital investment. I've worked for restaurant chains that say this restaurant we are opening today is going to lose money for 5 years. We have the money to lose, but it's going to take 5 years to get that reverse back, to get that reverse, to get it profit making.
yes.
So but then we got past the initial point was New York has elected governor after governor okay with the immigration policy going on in New York. No governor has ever been electing running on the premise that he's going to reverse the cycle, that he's going to close the doors to immigrants in New York and he's going to spend that money on the citizens. That is New York's decision. So when we premise that Donald Trump is fixing New York's decision making policies, let's go back to the one basic theory. There are no kings in America. We have 50 governors. We have one in Texas who runs on the basis that we're not going to allocate anything for immigrants. We had a sheriff in Florida that was arresting immigrants and dressing them in pink. Our voters reelected that sheriff.
Which
But in New York,
I am surprised. Are you revealing to our audience that you are an old school Dixiecrat Democrat? That
I'm just saying,
because the last I heard, I have never heard a person make as vigorous an argument for states' rights. Now, was it the progressives who dismantled
I'm not a
hold
progressive.
on, who dismantled? Well, I'm just saying. Okay, I didn't know that you were an old school Dixiecrat, because I can tell you this much: this in the civil rights movement. It was the use of federal law and right to impose on states who had the Jim Crow laws, right? You remember, Governor Wallace of Alabama, segregation now. Okay, well, are you standing with them when you say when you advocate for New York State's right, supreme right
So
to
everything has
set
a
it,
gray.
but
Everything has.
under
I
no,
don't.
no, no,
Segregation's wrong. So if the federal government can stop it at a 50 state level, stop it at a 50 state level.
well, but
When
Coach, all I'm saying is that you are making the case that the state of New York has the right to set immigration policy when the U.S. Constitution puts that power into the federal government. It
they're
is
not
not the
setting
state.
immigration policy, what they're
Oh,
saying is if
wait a minute,
somebody,
yes,
they're
wait
not.
up. You're talking about no kings because the president of the United States wants to exercise the constitutional authority of the federal government to tell the state that it is a federal responsibility to set the immigration policy of the country, not the state of New York, not the state of California.
We were talking
That is
about the
pretty clear.
allocation. We were talking about the allocation of funds, is what we were talking about.
No,
We
the
then
state can
covered in
allocate
three
their
different.
funds, but they don't set the immigration policy.
They don't set the immigration policy,
But
but
go back to what
nobody
you said.
needs.
How is he being a king because he's telling the state of New York that we set the immigration
He's
policy?
telling
Because
you,
that
no,
is a
no. The
federal
argument
responsibility.
was, the argument was, The federal government sets the immigration policy. The argument was where
Yes.
the money's going. New York City said, okay, the federal government didn't do a great job of preventing these 10 million people from crossing the border. They're here now. They're here now. Okay, at some point, if they violate immigration laws, no one's arguing the federal government's right to deport them. What they're
Yes.
saying is that we are giving them phone cards. We are feeding them. We don't want them starving on our streets. That's the state's right to allocate those funds.
That is
That's
the
not
state's.
Jim Crow's point of view. That's
That,
not anyone.
I'm just
That's
being
not
funny with that.
right, right.
Funny
No, I'm not arguing
because
that
you were
point.
so states' rights.
You have 50 governors. The logic is that when you have one person running 50 companies, you're going to be better off having 50 people running each individual company. So you take that from a business. Warren Buffett says we buy companies. You know why we buy companies? Because of the managers that run the companies. They run the companies. No one gets a phone call from me. Precision Cast Parts, he paid $37 billion for. Never got a call. The CEO never got a call. Under all sorts of crises, he said he's the CEO of that company.
I
So
hear you. I hear your point.
the
I
only
hear
other
your
point I have to
point.
make is I'm on a strict timeline. We got to start wrapping it up. So
Okay, well, let's put a bow on this. All I'm saying in terms of the balance between state power, how they allocate their money, and the federal government setting the policy is that now that the federal government is committed to trying to find those people who were let in violation of our immigration policy, under the previous administration, and they're sending federal agents, ICE, and all that into the states to do it. And the states are deploying some of their resources to resist the federal government's effort to do it. This is where states' rights, this is the limits of states' rights, right? Because this is an immigration issue, it's a national issue, and the state has, this is under the Constitution, is this, the federal government has the right to do it. Elections have consequences. We elected Biden. He let in 8 to 10 million. That was the consequence of 2020. We elected Donald Trump. He's decided we got to get those people out, and that means we're going in. And the idea that the state has the right to resist that is the most severe violation of the
that's a whole
Constitution.
other point that I'm not going to get into. I'm going to ask Beth to get in here on on closing
Well,
comments.
I just, the immigration thing I wanted to bring up because I feel like the fix is worse than Trump's fix is going to be worse than what the intention was, but also, with the tariffs, what I'm having a hard time understanding is the loyalty and the praise for these things that he's doing that is actually hurting everyday people right now. The tariffs making everything higher. If he gets in the Supreme Court and they say, yeah, okay, you're good, it's still going to make everything cost more. I don't understand how, like, if people are suffering right now, we can't wait for manufacturing to come back. We can't wait for the tariffs to level out. He ran on all these premises to make everyday life easier, and he's not doing it yet. We are still clapping like trained seals for a man who says, "I'm gonna stop the forever wars." No, he just bombed another boat in Venezuela. Like, what are we? What are we talking about? You know what I mean? Like, he sent bombs over to uh, Gaza? Was it Gaza? I can't remember. But the point being is, he's not a president that wants to end all wars. He just wants a Nobel Peace Prize, and he wants to say that he ended war. He said he ended wars that weren't even in war. Like, I'm having a hard time understanding how we're still clapping and applauding and not seeing that he's not doing it for us. The only thing he's done is for him and his billionaire buddies.
Great points. And there's a lot of
Oh,
follow-up conversation there. There's a lot of follow-up conversation there. And we are going to do this again with Charlie on the next one, hopefully. Kevin, talk about the book, and I'm going to wrap it up with the whole like, share, subscribe, and comment thing.
yes, thank you for the
Well,
book.
oh, yes, Beth, indeed. And Charlie, thank you. Well, Coach, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Yeah, the book is Onward at Last, the 2024 Presidential Election Edition. It is available online, Amazon, anywhere that sells books. But I also want to announce that I am launching a new podcast called Breadcrumbs on October 1st. It's called Breadcrumbs, and it's the podcast for people who know it's not working. All of our conversation today was about how life is not working today. Well, we need to start talking about it in a way that gets past all the labels and focuses in on the person in the mirror, because it's not working. And the only thing we can control about it not working is how we contribute to it. That we can control, right? And that's what the podcast is going to be about. More to come. But thank you all. Great conversation today.
That was a
So
great
good to see you,
conversation.
Beth.
It was beautiful. Like, share, subscribe, comment. That's my job to say that. I love the conversation we had today. I say it again. We have a responsibility. These conversations are creating a following. I've got another offer. I just read the email out loud to you guys. Didn't There was a lot more to it, but
Yes.
it was a great email. It made me feel good about what we do. We're not disagreeing. We're agreeing to disagree. We're talking about a lot of important things. We're going to get, and that's our job, and that's our opportunity in this day and age of polarization and social media and YouTube and everything else that the people are watching more so than the actual standard TV they watched 30 years ago. Looking forward to a bright, bright future for Political No Brainer. Looking forward. We're also launching the Chair Across the Aisle podcast, and we're also going to launch the Kids Quack podcast, which is going to get kids on talking about lots of important stuff. And
Oh,
um and that's
cool.
upcoming. Looking for I got a guest. It's gonna kick it off, I believe, but I haven't heard back yet. So look, guys, I'm gonna send out another email 2 weeks from now. Let's plan on it.
Let's
Sounds
do
good.
it.
Thanks,
Yeah, we'll
everybody.
be traveling. Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
See
Talk
ya.
to you soon. Bye,
Okay.
guys.
Take
Bye.
care. Be well.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. That was beautiful. Thanks.